Adam Neumann's new startup just dropped. It's called Flow. Yeah, the same Adam Neumann under whose leadership WeWork dropped from a $50 billion down to a $4 billion valuation before the IPO, leaving investors holding the bag and walking away with $2 billion. Now, as for this new startup, it hasn't even launched yet and it already has a valuation over $1 billion and has had one of the biggest VC firms write their biggest check in history. So in this video, we're going to find out what Flow is all about. We'll go over the details of Flow and what some very, very pissed off people are saying. Long story short, Flow is a company focused on the residential real estate market. And from what we know, it's focused on the rental market, specifically solving the problem that renters can have where they rent for years and end up with no equity in their property.
Rent?
Hearing about this, you might think, wow, Neumann's coming back in a major way and not skipping a beat. But what you might not know is he already came back earlier this year with a company with a similar name called Flow Carbon. But Flow Carbon was completely different because it focused on the carbon credit industry, raised $70 million, and was supposedly built kind of around blockchain. But we might never know more details than that because just recently, Flow Carbon's development was paused indefinitely. And as for what happened to that $70 million investor money, we don't know. And keep in mind, this project was just started about 6 months ago. But let's not write off Flow before we know more details. Neumann walked away with $1.5 billion after being removed as WeWork CEO. And what he did with that massive amount of money was start to buy up around 3,000 residential units to get the ball rolling with his new company Flow. So he does have some skin in the game here. These properties are primarily in the South, specifically Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and states like that. Now, Flow intends to manage and operate these properties, but then rent them out. And as mentioned earlier, according to Silicon Valley investor, solves the growing problem of no one being able to afford to own a home and fixing that. Because, quote, lack of home ownership is a driving force behind inequality and anxiety. Apparently, it's an idea that Neumann has been thinking about for years. And he even took a stab at it already with a venture called We Live while he was still at WeWork. Fizzled out after opening just 2 locations. Now, before we get into what people are saying about it, we know one more thing, and that is that Flow is developing a crypto wallet in parallel to its platform. Which you might think, oh, that's cool, you can use crypto to pay rent on Flow. Awesome. Well, according to a spokesperson, actually no. Flow will not be receiving crypto payments for rent on its apartments. Now, when you put all these things together, all the indicators seem not so hot. But there's a lot we don't know behind the scenes. An investment firm, Andreessen Horowitz, aka A16Z, was able to look behind the curtain and they loved what they saw. Enough to write their biggest check in history for $350 million. No doubt, that amount of money is massive, but it's still not even close to the $9 billion that SoftBank invested into WeWork. Money which basically evaporated. So what is Mr. Andreessen thinking? Let's find out. It's often underappreciated how one single person has fundamentally changed the office experience. We love to see founders build on past successes, combining that with lessons learned. For Mr. Neumann, the lessons and successes are plenty. And that is kind of facts. And other VCs do understand this. McKeever Conwell from Rare Breed Ventures said this about A16Z. Given the weight that VCs place on a founder and his network in the seed phase, it makes sense why they would go with Neumann. At least when it comes to building a multi-billion-dollar real estate business, something he's done before. But the many, many critics are saying this will further tarnish the brand of A16Z, which has recently had some speed bumps. Andrew Gadzecki, founder of MicroAcquire, said on Twitter, "Lots of startup founders admired this brand and that's all gone now. It takes years to build a brand and days to destroy one." Other critics, though, would say it didn't take days and that they've been on the downslide since getting into questionable crypto ventures. According to blogger Amy Castor, A16Z has been involved in many of these shitcoin scandals, articles words not mine, making a fortune off of securities as a fraud business model. Basically, you have some vaporware project, some token attached to it, you raise a massive amount of funding, and then you dump it on the public, getting your money back multiple times over. Now, this investment also comes at a very interesting time, because the sentiment on A16Z has also turned in another coincidental way. Recently, a letter was released that Mark Andreessen wrote to the board of his neighborhood in SF Atherton. The letter was against affordable housing in his neighborhood affordable housing being building taller buildings. And the reason he gave was it would destroy real estate values and the vibe of the neighborhood. This is also known as NIMBYism, not in my backyard. People who vote a certain way, when those policies have to go in their neighborhood, they change their tune. And Pearson got a lot of criticism for this, not just because it would change the face of his neighborhood, but also because he's talking about the value of his property, and he is literally a billionaire. So why does he even care? And the ironic part, in case you didn't catch on to it, is his biggest investment ever in Flow. Well, its mission is basically to democratize housing ownership and make it more affordable for the average person. Now, let's turn our attention back to Neumann, who has a less than sterling reputation, not just for being an ineffective CEO. You might have already heard the WeWork story, but in case you didn't, when he was there, he did some questionable things with investor money according to TechCrunch, such as spending this money on copious amounts of booze for the office, to fund a school for his wife's unrelated vanity project, and a wave pool. Now, perhaps most infamously, Neumann trademarked the word "we" and then sold it back to the company for $6 million. For this "we" trademark, he was caught and returned the money to the company, but these are only the scandals we know about and not all of the ones that we don't. Now, here's one thing to think about. You've probably heard of Theranos. Tons of YouTube documentaries on it. There's a book that went pretty viral. Basically, this woman, Elizabeth Holmes, scammed a bunch of investors because there was no real product. The amount of money those investors lost, though, was $1 billion. WeWork lost investors $11 billion. And while Holmes is completely villainized in the industry, Neumann came straight back to the table for seconds and raised $350 million. Even though he does have his defenders. With one person tweeting, you can't compare the two because he did not commit fraud. He was just really good at raising money, a great salesman, and then investors didn't like how he was running the company. Many echoed the sentiment of endangering the public with faulty medical technology, not being the same as just being a little too good at fundraising. But still, when you look at the amount of money lost, it's just interesting to compare it. We could read reactions all day, but I will leave you with a tweet from Jason Calacanis, a pretty big industry name. If a company is worth $1 billion before it gets launched, then it's probably a scam.
Now, this video has been pretty negative against Neumann. Maybe he deserves it. But let's be honest, if you didn't know what happened behind the scenes with the investors, you would think WeWork is super successful. When you look at its impact, the fact that it's pretty much the go-to co-working space worldwide, and its amount of locations. With its reality-bending growth rate in the real estate industry, you could call it a real disruption. And now with the fact that real estate ownership is on the highway to disaster and most of us feel like we're never gonna own a home again, maybe Neumann is exactly the anti-hero that we need. We'll find out soon. And for future updates and more tech stories, subscribe to our channel.